Throughout this semester, Pompeii and its destruction and rediscovery has been a focus for my blog. In this slidecast, I'll be going through my findings as well as providing an overview of Pompeii and then what its rediscovery means for how the world views history and how it has changed history. I'll start off with what Pompeii was, what it meant to the people of Pompeii, and what happened to it. After that, we're going to jump forward in time when the city was rediscovered and what exactly was found and what it means. Pompeii, a city too familiar to the world, once a place where Roman and Greek culture flourished. Founded in the 8th century, Pompeii was a city where most distinguished of citizens would go for vacation, entertainment, and shopping. It had big open markets, arenas for games and gladiatorial fights, beautiful horses, and a huge shadow cast by Mount Vesuvius, the perpetrator of Pompeii's eventual downfall. In the years leading up to 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius began to warn the people of Pompeii that it was ready to erupt. The city began to feel earthquakes and tremors, but the people soon became comfortable with it and expected it to be a norm. Then Mount Vesuvius could not hold in any longer. If no one would listen, then they would meet their end. Mount Vesuvius then erupted, first releasing smoke, warning the people living below to leave. These are a few words from an eyewitness, Pliny the Younger. It was not clear at that distance from which mountain the cloud was rising. Meanwhile, on Mount Vesuvius, broad sheets of fire and leaping flames blazed at several points, their bright glare emphasized by the darkness of the night. In a matter of moments, Pompeii was destroyed, covered in ash left by the mountain. Some inhabitants escaped, but a lot were literally left in the dust, encased in coffins of ash and dust, soon to be forgotten by the world. As mentioned in my last slide, Pliny the Younger is the only account the world has of Pompeii, but we'll talk about that later. For centuries, the remains of Pompeii were untouched. It wasn't until 1748 that some excavators digging around that area looking for ancient artifacts discovered that the ash left by the mountain 2,000 years earlier had preserved everything. Even buildings remained completely intact. Skeletons, pots, as well as many other goods and valuables lay on the streets completely intact, as if frozen in time. The world went on, but Pompeii remained the way it was for centuries, waiting to be rediscovered. This is where we get into the core of my research. The discovery of Pompeii was incredibly important for the 18th century as it sparked newfound interest in ancient Greek and Roman culture. People became fascinated by Pompeii's art and architecture. Wealthy people would mimic the architecture of rooms for their own homes as well as display replicas of Pompeii's artifacts. While fascination over Pompeii boomed in the 18th century, the discovery of the lost city was so much more important than just options for decor and architecture. Pompeii is one of the only events in history that has been frozen in time. This makes Pompeii critical in the study of ancient and Roman culture. Since its rediscovery, Pompeii has been one of the longest studied excavation sites, and there's a reason for that. It's a fascinating subject, and there is so much to learn from it. Especially with the technology improving and evolving, information still continues to come from Pompeii 3 centuries after being rediscovered. By looking at the remains of Pompeii over the years, archaeologists have been able to determine what the daily life for the people of Pompeii looked like. By looking at the buildings and houses, archaeologists are able to determine that Pompeii was a place for wealthy citizens living in Pompeii for vacation and leisure, by looking at the type of artifacts and the size of the villas left behind. Not only do the remaining buildings and artifacts tell a lot about the people of Pompeii, but the people themselves say a lot about their own lives. Technology has gotten to a point where archaeologists are able to look at the bodies and it can tell them about their life and health. One example is of a boy who they were able to determine was 4 years old, as well as that his lips were pursed, as if in shock. Other examinations of other bodies tell researchers that a lot of people died of head injuries and falling debris. Many researchers have explained that it is haunting and moving looking at these people next to their families, holding each other, frozen in their final moments. It isn't just people that the volcano preserved. Researchers were able to find many things such as preserved food and animals, in particular horses. 79 AD, of course, was a time when horses were the number one mode of transportation, besides boat travel. The bodies of horses were discovered. Looking at the bones, researchers are able to determine the species, which leads into what they may have been used for, such as labor work, transport. While Pompeii's streets, artifacts, and people tell a lot about 79 AD and life around that time, Pompeii's volcano, Mount Vesuvius, has just as much to say. Researchers have been able to study Mount Vesuvius to determine what it was like living next to the volcano and what warnings and signs it may have left for the people of Pompeii. With modern technology, researchers are able to determine how long volcanoes have been erupting. By studying how the volcano acts in the present as well as studying its most recent eruption in 1944, researchers determined that there were likely many warnings explaining that something was about to happen. Mount Vesuvius once again erupted on March 17, 1944. It caused the death of 150 people. This eruption provides even more insight into the one that happened in 79 AD. After this event, many researchers kept their eye on the volcano, and its cycles helped determine when the next eruption would take place. Looking at the correlation between 1944's eruption and 79 AD's has helped people take the necessary precautions in case this mountain once again decides to awake. While all the scientific proof of bones and artifacts help provide a window into ancient life, the most interesting piece of history left behind from Pompeii is the only eyewitness account by Pliny the Younger. He witnesses the destruction safely from a nearby island, later writing about what he saw and his experience. How reliable some of the things Pliny reports is questionable, seeing that he wrote the letters years after the event. There is only one thing that is undeniable. He certainly captures the feel and the fear in his writing. He writes, "A dense black cloud was coming up behind us, spreading over the earth like a flood. You could hear the shrieks of women, the wailing of infants, the shouting of men. Some were calling their parents, others their children or their wives, trying to recognize them by their voices." This, in addition to the things found at the site, provide an overall context to the tragedy of Pompeii. The research found at Pompeii has fed into the utter fascination with the past, but also has provided a great insight into the ancient world. It has become one of the only events in history that provides the most amount of information about ancient history. Pompeii was a great tragedy that ended many unfortunate souls' lives. The volcano was unrelenting in its eruption, destroying everything in its path. And while it seemed to obliterate everything in its path, it seemed to in fact preserve the city, encase it in a coffin of volcanic ash. Today, Pompeii remains a fascination. It has become a topic of books, films, TV, and research for centuries, and will probably continue to be the subject of interest for people until it has nothing left to tell us about the ancient world it left behind.